Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts. And every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, here at the John Hope Franklin Center. We are joined today by Professor Bianca Williams, who is Associate Professor in the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. She is the author of The Pursuit of Happiness, Black Women, Diasporic Dreams, and the Politics of Emotional Transnationalism, published in 2018 by Duke University Press.
Yes.
A 2009 graduate of the Culture Anthropology Department, PhD, here at Duke University. How are you doing, Professor?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
One of the things I love about this book, and you talk about it in the first chapter, when we think about political projects, you know, we think about land, we think about money, the power to vote. You talk about happiness as a political project.
Yes.
Unpack that for a moment.
Sure. So the book is an argument that pursuing happiness is a political project for Black women, inspired by Melissa Harris Perry's Sister Citizen and the work that she's doing in that text, really laying out the fact that the state, the government, doesn't have our best interests in mind.
Right.
Our misrecognition is central to how the U.S. operates politically, economically, et cetera. And also inspired by Audre Lorde's revolutionary statement around self-care. And what I saw from these women, I didn't go into the field studying happiness. I actually went into the field ready to study diasporic relationships between African Americans and Jamaicans. But what kept happening is that the women would stop me, they would say, I'm happy here. There was a lot of happiness dialogue. And so when I came back from the field and looked at my data, it was happiness that stood out. And so the argument is that these women are very clear that happiness is not available to them within the U.S., within these national borders. And though it seems to be an inalienable right for some people, it's not for all of us because of our racialized and gendered positionalities. And so they're invested in kind of finding where they do have access to happiness and how they can use the capital here to find it somewhere else.
So there were people that will say, you're an ethnographer.
Yes.
You had the best research agenda possible, traveling back and forth to Jamaica.
Drinking red stripes.
So first of all, how did you meet these women, right? You know, how did that become a project in which you would essentially become, part of their lives for almost a decade, traveling back and forth with them in their pursuit of happiness, right? I mean, are you pursuing your happiness in this way? In the same context.
I don't know that mine lies in Jamaica. My family's from Jamaica. I had never been before I did field work. And when I went, I was actually going there to study Japanese consumption of dance hall culture. But that project didn't work out in my preliminary research. It was a long time ago. And so, but when I was doing the research to go to Jamaica and figure out where I should stay, I came across the website that I ended up doing virtual ethnography in, Jamaicans.com. And what was fascinating to me was there was a section of the website where tourists were talking to one another and kind of giving advice on where to stay, and they were these trip reports. And one trip report was almost 300 pages long, and it was this really kind of what I would call organic ethnographer report where the people were very aware of the power dynamics that were happening within travel and tourism and within the diaspora. And so I went to the country to do my first project there, and came across these women, and they were amazing and fascinating. And I was like, they're living their full lives, they're dancing, they know the latest hip hop lyrics, the latest dance hall moves. And then Deborah Thomas, who was one of my co-advisors at the time, I came back and told her about them, and she was like, this is your dissertation project. And what I found amazing about them is that they weren't sitting back and saying, okay, so racism and sexism in the US exists and we're just gonna have to suffer through it. And they were like, no, we're going to live full lives post 40, post 50, post 60. We're gonna have intimate sexual lives. We're gonna have friendships, and enjoy pleasure and leisure.
One of the things I wonder about with these women, in order to do this consistently, that means they have, relative to where Black women are in the U.S., I mean, they have a relative amount of privilege to be able to have professional lives that allows them enough leisure time to take long trips, and obviously access to money that allows them to do that. How much were they aware of that relative privilege while they were in Jamaica, particularly in relationship to Black women in Jamaica who very often are working in the service economy, at best in some cases,
Right. What stood out to me about these women was that a lot of them are kind of lower middle class, somewhat unstable middle class. So, postal workers, high school guidance counselors.
Right?
Yeah,
Black aspirational class.
Exactly.
Right.
So they're not, the lawyers, the doctors, the professors who have, in theory, disposable income, and we can talk about that later. They work really hard for their money, and their trips to Jamaica are sacrifices. Like, they save a lot of time and money to do it. They were aware of the disproportionate kind of power dynamics and class differences between them and Jamaican women, but I don't know that they spent a lot of time really teasing that out. And one of the chapters is me kind of analyzing this diasporic triangle, so African American women who may or may not be looking for sex but are really enjoying being the object of desire or the desirable in Jamaica from Jamaican men. What are Jamaican men getting out of this kind of relationship? And then the fact that these women are going to Jamaica, and in some ways, just because of the way tourism as an industry is set up, are making Jamaican women invisible in the ways that they are invisible in the U.S.
Absolutely.
Right? And so, whether intentionally or not, kind of doing to Jamaican women what they are experiencing in the U.S. So there was some acknowledgement of it. I'm not sure they spent a lot of time teasing that out. But there was a desire for sisterhood, though. They still desired to be connected to Jamaican women. But again, power dynamics, right?
The question of why Jamaica, and this idea of particularly African Americans needing some idea of a Black paradise, in 2018 it's Wakanda.
Yes, right.
For these women, Jamaica is their Wakanda.
Right.
A decade ago. Why Jamaica in that context? And as an extension, why the Jamaican man?
Yeah.
in that context.
So I think Stella, both the movie and the film, have a huge influence. So when I tell people what I studied, they assume that these women are Stellas, right? And so we have to tease that. I think it's more complicated than that.
Teaching this book to my undergraduates, none of them had seen the movie.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like they had no reference for it. It's like, no, Taye Diggs was like a little. Taye Diggs literally looks like a little boy. It's like,
yeah, he's super young in that movie. So for them, like Stella, it wasn't that they wanted to be Stella, but there was this idea that Stella gave permission for Black women to travel alone and travel in groups and can do leisure, right? There was this like, we have experienced a lot of pushback from our families and friends on being selfish enough to experience leisure. And the story, the fairy tale of Stella, the fantasy of Stella gave them permission to do that. So Stella gives them permission. And then once they're there, Jamaica is about being in a predominantly Black space. So being able to escape, maybe even momentarily, white American racism and white gaze, and to be able to interrogate some of these power dynamics. This idea that we have a shared history of transatlantic slave trade with Jamaican people. Some people would say that they felt like their spiritual home was Jamaica. So in thinking about transatlantic slave trade, the stop in Jamaica meant that people were able to hold on to African culture better than we were in the U.S., that these things were really erased from us in the U.S. And so going to Jamaica is both a fantasy and a paradise and a release, but also a deep connection to something that they feel like culturally they cannot access here.
One of the more poignant parts of the book is in the end, when you're writing your conclusion.
Oh no.
And you raise this question that I've never heard really raised in the context of folks who do ethnography, that no one actually prepares you to leave the field, right? To reintegrate back into your life and at least develop some distance from the field, even as you're still very much in the writing of the book, intellectually connected to the field.
It was extremely difficult, and I haven't figured out yet how to train my graduate students or my undergrads to do that better either. And I don't think we talk about it enough. I mean, as a ethnographer, who shows up in the field is you, but it is a different version of you. There's a lot of things that we did as a group, or even conversations, or people that I would never really have in my everyday life. I'm pretty quiet, generally speaking, insular in some ways. And there's things as an ethnographer, you kind of have to push yourself out of a comfort zone in order to build trust and relationships with people, in order to understand culture. Like, how is this community working? What is important to folks? And it doesn't always line up with who you are in your real life. So you really are not performing, but extending a public self as an ethnographer. And then when the field is over, part of my the tough, challenging part was that I did virtual ethnography, and so every day I would choose an endpoint. There was a new post that would go up the next day, and I'd be like, oh, I have to have that too. So it was not only leaving a physical field, but leaving a virtual field. When did that field work stop was a question. But the physical work was, I'm a Black woman who's studying Black women. I very much felt connected to these women. They gifted me their stories. They told me that they were telling me their stories because they wanted our generation to be able to do Black womanhood better, to do it in a way that wasn't as traumatic. They want us to learn from their mistakes and their wins. So leaving the field felt like, you know, when you're calling me at 11 p.m., during field work, yes, I'm going to answer that call, even though I'm married and I'm like I have all these things. But when you leave the field, no, I can't answer the phone all the time. No, I can't mediate this thing. It's really tough to figure out where to stop that relationship. It's a relationship that you have, and I think a lot of us do. I don't think I left the field well. At all, and I wish I had maybe considered it better and would have had more strategies for how to do that, to let them know, not even only me and like my personal transformation, coming back to my family, coming back to my friends, coming back to school to finish, but them, that relationship has shifted.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by Professor Bianca Williams, who's Associate Professor of Anthropology at the Graduate Center at University of New York, the author of The Pursuit of Happiness, Black Women, Diasporic Dreams, and the Politics of Emotional Transnationalism, published in 2018 by Duke University Press. I was thinking about the fact, as you talked about your own Jamaican identity, Shaggy performed at the birthday party concert for Queen Elizabeth, and it caught my eye because it was like this weird, like, finality to the British Empire acknowledging colonialism in some part. And I often think about the fact that, despite the fact we talk so much about kind of hip hop and its Jamaican roots, there are ways in which Jamaican identity continues to be obscured. In hip hop, if not Black American identity in general. I remember when the late Richard Iton was alive, and we were talking about Jay-Z, and he's like, you know, he's from Brooklyn. Right, there's some West Indian roots somewhere up in there. Right, somewhere, and he never, and even Buster, though he does so more so lately, in those early days, he didn't really acknowledge it. So there's a lot of obscurity around that. Just thinking more broadly, you know, what is it about the way that Jamaican identity really now has been subsumed in terms of what we think about as African American identity, particularly as we're kind of triangulating between the Black U.S., the Black Caribbean, and then African Blacks, right? You know, folks who are coming from Ghana, Nigeria, and places like that. Right.
You know, Jamaican people are accused of having big island mentality, which means we think we run everything everywhere, wherever we are, we conquer that space. So culturally, I would say we do that. I think, so part of it, at least the U.S. and Jamaica, is the geographic kind of closeness of it, proximity of it. And so that cultural, I mean, we're constantly going in and out. Families are crossing those kind of national borders. So through music, through film, through like even patois and linguistically, there's a closeness there. And then again, Jamaicans are I call them like a teaching people. Like wherever we are, we're teaching people our background, our history, how to spice up or make better that thing that is local to you. And so I do think part of what drove me to study Jamaica was that growing up as an African American in a Jamaican family that identifies as Jamaican American, but also African American. I remember my grandmother, Spike Lee's Malcolm X came out. I was my militant self in middle school and high school, and my grandmother said she didn't know who Malcolm X was. And I was like, what do you mean?
Right.
And it was that moment where I clearly understood that my African American history was acknowledged as Black history in my house. We were Black together, but there was this other history there. And I think what is being teased out in the book and what is being teased out in hip hop and dance hall, whatever, are these kind of, when are those shared diasporic moments happening, or when those shared racialized moments happening, and where is there really a different history? And I think Jamaica is kind of the symbol of the Caribbean. Like, people know Jamaica and Jamaicans, and they don't necessarily know the histories of Trinidad or Guyana or, you know, these other kind of countries. Haiti and other places. So it's African American folks really contending with the fact that Jamaican culture is a powerful cultural force, and then where are the similarities and differences?
What's next for you?
Oh man, so I'm thinking about radical honesty, and you've heard a little bit about this, thinking about radical honesty as a pedagogical force in the classroom, a Black feminist form of teaching in the classroom, but also a form of organizing, and how we can both speak truth to power, but also put truth into practice.
And how does self-care really play into that? You know, because being around, knowing about your project or the project of your colleague Treva Lindsay, and what it means to actually speak a truth to Black women's trauma, and actually be able to continuously do that and survive that without, you know, being taken over you know, by those energies.
I think Black women are constantly making sure we're not erased, because we are aware of the power of our stories and our narratives and our strategies for doing wellness. And so in making sure that we're constantly not erased and teach, we have to find ways to not burn out. We're trying to find ways to teach those behind us how to take care of ourselves. And my argument is that Black women have a radical honesty is getting to the fact that Black women have a particular way, it's an embodied knowledge. We have a knowing that is inside our spirits, that's inside our bodies. And part of it is this kind of trying to create strategies for self-care to teach ourselves and others how to be well.
This is a more personal question, and we've talked about it before,
I was about to say.
but I'm about to ask you to share a little bit more on it. I think there's a way in which you see yourself very naturally as an activist. You've been much more ambivalent about being the writer-scholar. And you've been more ambivalent at different parts, earlier parts of your career. How have you kind of dealt with those kind of ambivalences and apprehensions and contradictions of wanting to be an activist, but at the same time wanting to be an engaged scholar?
I think I have been ambivalent and hesitant around that public intellectual title. The public intellectual part, the intellectual part was a bit tough for me. I think I've been a natural organizer. Juanima Lubiano is actually the person who taught me what activist meant. She called me that my senior year in undergrad, and I had no idea what it meant. And I was like, I don't know if I embody this title. I'm a natural organizer. I do believe that we should fight injustice everywhere, and it was easier for me to become a public organizer when you know the movement for Black Lives happened, when so many of our people were getting killed in the streets. It was like, it wasn't a question. I had to find a way to use not only my personal narrative and experience, but the skills and tools that we get as academics and as scholars, figure out a way to use that to find liberation for us. And I think some of it just comes from the fact that I don't get to question it anymore. Like it's urgency, it's required, and then being trained as a Black feminist scholar, that's what Black feminists have been doing for forever, in every small ways and big ways. So I'm less hesitant to embrace the publicness of the organizing, and maybe still a little shaky around the public intellectual part.
We've been joined by Professor Bianca Williams. She's the author of The Pursuit of Happiness, Black Women, Diasporic Dreams, and the Politics of Emotional Transnationalism, published in 2018, Duke University Press. She is Associate Professor of Anthropology at the City University Graduate Center. It's like all these C's, right? And 2009 PhD, Cultural Anthropology, Duke University. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every Black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All Black, everything Black, culture over everything, y'all. We taking it back, Black.